All right, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Shaded Youth. As usual, we have an amazing guest for today. We have the one and only Mawlana Abdullah Ayaz Mullanee, all the way from the UK. Alhamdulillah, it's,
UK.
we
I'm from
have
Canada.
Canada, sorry.
Assalamualaikum.
Yeah, it's just, I've had a couple UK guests, so it's,
No
I
worries.
got confused.
I just had to make that clear.
Of course, of course. So all the way from Canada, mashallah. Toronto, right? I believe.
Yes, Toronto.
Okay, alhamdulillah. So at least I got that right.
No, alhamdulillah. I mean, UK is a great place. I think people were very confused about the accent.
Right. Yeah, of course, you're right. So I recently, not recently, but I first came across your page through Twitter. Mashallah, you have a huge following through there, and alhamdulillah, you're giving like a lot of beneficial insight through your tweets on there. So for those of us in the audience that may not have heard of you, could you just give like a brief synopsis or a brief biography of who you are, inshallah?
Okay, so pretty much I teach at 3 different institutes. So I have my own institute called Lobab Academy, where I'm the dean. I'm an instructor at Mathaba Institute. I'm also a head teacher at Darul Uloom Islamic School, and I studied in Darul Uloom Zakariyya in South Africa.
So you were raised in Canada, I'm assuming.
Kind of. Meaning, I came here when I was 10 years old. I spent the first 10 years of my life in Pakistan, and then from 10 onwards, I was in Canada.
Okay, gotcha. And so you did your studies mostly in Canada.
Meaning, I did my high school in Canada, and then I went to South Africa.
Gotcha.
And now I'm also doing my bachelor's of psychology in Canada.
Okay, gotcha. So, are you a Hafiz by chance?
No, I'm not, which is a very
okay. Gotcha. Which is surprising because I know a lot of people who study like for I believe it was Dars Nizami, right? That's the curriculum in South Africa.
Yep.
I know a lot of them, they try to do their hifz beforehand.
Honestly, I wish I did. I think a lot of people do that, and I think there's a lot of benefit to it. I just didn't do it. That's all. But inshallah, I think one benefit of doing it, inshallah, if Allah gives me the chance afterwards, is that as you're learning, you have an idea of what you're saying and what you're memorizing. So you have a different, I think, value of it. And also, I think it's a lot easier as well. But what ends up happening is people like myself, once you graduate, you become lazy and you just want to graduate. And that's a really bad thing, but that's probably why most people don't end up going to hifz afterwards.
Gotcha. Okay. So you finished your Alim course in South Africa, and so how many years has it been since then?
It's been 2015, so I'm going towards my 6th year.
6 years since you graduated.
Yeah.
Gotcha, mashallah. So I asked because in our area, I live in New York, so a lot of Bengalis have kind of we've gathered in one spot, and mashallah, our community is mainly Hanafi, right? So a lot of our scholars are from South Africa or Pakistan.
I might know
study these areas.
Yeah.
So you might actually know some of them, which is the funny part.
Yeah.
So, like for example, one of the teachers that I studied like here and there just on weekends. So one of the teachers I go to regularly is Mufti Mujib, and he teaches at Darul Uloom, New York.
I think I've heard of his name, but I wouldn't want to.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of you guys, so it's natural. But yeah, it's really interesting just how the Darul Uloom network, it kind of just branched off into like different areas of the world, right? Because I'm not too familiar with the history, but it started in Deoband, India, right?
Yes, it did. I think it just goes to show, right? Like I think a lot of us, when we end up giving da'wah, especially online, we end up sacrificing quality for quantity. And there's something I worry about a lot as well, especially like running an online institute. But I really think stuff like that, it goes to show the value of quality, just focusing on few people but really, giving them the right knowledge, giving them the right dawah, that can make a huge difference down the road. I mean, think about the Battle of Badr, where you only have 313 people, and they changed the world. They
Yeah.
changed the history of the world. So I think a lot of us, we need to remind ourselves, especially like, when you're on social media, you're worried about how many likes you get and how many followers you have. It's not about that. It's really is about focusing on few people, but quality. And we see that with the Darul Uloom system as well.
Amazing, mashallah. So you've tweeted a lot recently about a certain topic that we're gonna go a bit more into, inshallah, as we go through the episode.
Okay.
So before we get into it, I just want to give like maybe a content warning, I guess, right? And if you're under a certain age, maybe watch another episode and come back when you're a bit older. But actually, I think this topic can span throughout all the ages, because unfortunately, it's really affecting people like at a younger age every single year.
Yeah.
Like I've heard stories of like, even 10-year-olds falling into this trap, and if you haven't figured out by now, we're talking about porn addiction or masturbation, or that kind of space on the internet. And a lot of research has been going into the harms of it throughout the years, but unfortunately people are still falling into this trap.
Can I just give a statistic about young
Sure.
people being exposed to pornography, right? They say that research shows that online pornography is a significant source of sex education for young people, right? To the point, it says that 75% of online youth using the internet to find health information, often with a sexual focus. Like, what I'm saying is there's a lot of research that shows that young people, especially by the time they're in middle school, they end up learning their sexual education from pornography online, which is so crazy.
Oof. Yeah, that's insane. Even before middle school, man, because I remember when I was in middle school and I was in like the 6th grade, people were talking about what they did like in the 5th grade, and it was insane. And this was like I'm 20 right now, so this is like around 10 years ago, and I'm assuming like now it's just gotten a lot worse. Like, for example, I remember, just to give a bit more context into the scope of this issue, I remember in 6th grade, a bunch of my friends, right, so a bunch of them would discuss these issues, and they would discuss like their favorite categories and favorite, like they would talk about them as if they're like movie stars, right? Like you're memorizing the names of these people. And subhanAllah, it's just like people, I think at a certain point, maybe people had shame for it, but now it's as if like, oh, it's like, you're trading Pokemon cards, right? And mashallah, I know you have some interest in like playing cards, because I watched, yeah, like DC cards, something like that, right?
Oh, DC cards.
Yeah,
yes.
DC cards, right? So
honestly, I haven't played in a while, but yes, I think another thing that about this thing really was shocking for me. I thought, because there's a very big prominent argument being made that at least on a secular lens, pornography is not harmful.
Yeah.
And by looking at the scientific literature, I was very, very surprised at how clear the academic journals are being about the harms of pornography. There's just a plethora of information out there, of research, surveys, correlation studies showing that there's just so much harm that pornography brings into a person's life. And yet, I think there's this myth just being thrown around like, oh, at least on it's like a religious thing to not, like pornography or not support pornography. But even on a secular lens, an academic lens, there's just so much harm. And that's what we tried to do in the recent article that we published.
Gotcha. So we can kind of start with just breaking down the problem itself. So through your research, what have you found to be like the major trigger or the major reason for why people might fall into an addiction such as this?
So the thing is, I wasn't researching that element of it. However, alhamdulillah, I've been in the community for a few years. I've taken phone calls. So what I do is every single day, I have a slot in which anyone can book a time and they can just call me. And I think what ends up happening is that I think especially for men, I mean, I'm sure there's a very big percentage of females who are also indulging in this, but just because I'm a male, a lot of men open up to me about their addiction. And I think because it's just so, I don't think the community understands how easy of a sin it is for a lot of people. And I think initially for a lot of people, it's curiosity, it's, unintentional exposure. It's a lot of these kind of things, but then it just ends up building on. And in many cases, it ends up ruining their worldly life as well as the sins that they're incurring in the afterlife.
Definitely. Do you think external forces also have a role to play, such as maybe the person isn't doing much in their life, so they're kind of being idle a lot of the time, not really focusing on productive things?
I feel like it's such a vast array of people that can fall into this. It's like some people are too busy and this is like a stress release. But
right.
I do think for a lot of young people, a way to stay away from a lot of vices and a lot of temptations is to keep ourselves busy in productive ways, right? So if you have a passion, you're working towards something, you have a good community around you, oftentimes that could be the thing that helps you not get involved in a lot of the problems that are happening before us. Because oftentimes people end up falling into traps is when they start feeling hopeless. So that's why you see people who are under a lot of stress, people who are, genuinely feeling like they're not going to have a halal outlet for these things. They end up falling in these kind of sins. And may Allah protect us.
May Allah protect us. I mean,
so hold on, can I add just one more thing, right?
Sure.
I was reading this book called Willpower. It's a wonderful book. I've read a lot of books on this topic, but I think Willpower is a very comprehensive book. And in that, one thing that was really interesting that it was talking about how willpower depletes throughout the day. So at nighttime is normally the time where people are more likely to cheat on their spouses. And that was kind of interesting for me, because if you look at the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ, say, I seek the refuge of the daybreak, مِنْ شَرِّ مَا خَلَقَ, from the evils of what he created, وَمِنْ شَرِّ غَاسِقٍ إِذَا وَقَبَ, and from the evils of the night when it spreads out. So we see that a lot of sins are done in the night. And one of the reasons that I think we can kind of think about, especially in light of what is said in the book Willpower, is that at night we have more of our willpower depleted. So even with pornography, I think a lot of people struggle with it at night. And I think I've heard scholars talk about this. I've heard people talk about this. And one thing they recommend is not being alone on your phone at night, for example, right? So just something interesting that came to mind.
So, of course, people, like you said, nighttime is pretty much the time where they get that stress relief and they get that kind of dopamine rush, I assume. So what about for one tip that you just gave was, surround yourself with people, try to do that. But let's say, someone's alone. Let's say someone is, cut off from their community. How would they kind of mitigate this issue for them?
I think a lot of it is putting limits on ourselves. So I think, I mean, it depends. Are we talking about someone who's already addicted or someone who just worried about, falling into this?
So I'll give you more context to this. I have a few friends that have come to me for this problem, and a lot of their main issue is that it's so easy for them to be alone, especially like the past year because of COVID. A lot of people I assume like fell into this addiction a lot more heavily than they would have previously, just because they were at home a lot more and they were cut off from the community. And obviously, unfortunately for our communities, it's Bengali, Pakistani, South Asian, like immigrant maybe, right? So we don't really have that quality family time
Okay.
So it's super easy to be by yourself.
No, for sure. I think definitely, loneliness has something to do with it as well. So now I've been discussing this with a few people about what is the best step of countering something like this. I think first of all, if you're a person who's not addicted, but you do feel like it is something you're exposed to, it's something. By the way, when I say you, I'm not talking to you. I'm just saying.
No, I get it. Don't worry.
But I'm saying if a person feels like it is something that they are exposed to, and down the road it might be something that they might get addicted to, I think something simple as just downloading a porn blocker is great. Just because obviously I think everyone is smart enough to just override the porn blocker, but a lot of times for people there's just like a few seconds or a small amount of time that like they don't, that where that desire is there. And I think with the help of anything that just gets in your way might be a great start. But then if a person is already addicted to this, I think yesterday after I published my article, we were talking about this in the scholars group, and there was a scholar on the group with a psychology background, and then he recommended addictions counseling. I think that should be something that people should sort out, just especially because I think it's just so normalized that we just don't see the harms of it. But after looking into it, the harms are insane. And then I think a second thing to look into, and this is just something that I've seen with people who have approached me and steps that we've taken, are accountability softwares. So accountability softwares like Covenant Eyes, for example, the way they work is the person has a partner, and the book, The Porn Myth, recommends that this partner should not be your wife, just so you know. But let's say they have a friend who's a neutral party, right? And once a week, that software will send your entire internet history to your friend from your computer and your phone, highlighting any at-risk websites. So we actually tried this with a few people, and alhamdulillah, right now I assume they're porn free. So, and even once again, people can override these things, but what they really do need is just something to, just a little bit of a slap on the wrist when that desire is there. Because for the most part, most people don't want to fall into this trap. It's just the moments of weaknesses where they can need a little bit of a help. And I think softwares like that could really help.
Gotcha, definitely. So through your research, was it more harm-based, looking at the harms of it?
Only talking about the harms.
Gotcha.
Hold on, it's a bit more specific because I wanted my article to be, focused. It was the harms that porn use of men has on their marriages, right? So their long-term relationship. So that was my focus there.
So what were some of the effects that it did have on their marriages?
Yeah. So we saw three different types of harms. The first harm was that there was a lot of harm to the relationship satisfaction and the sexual satisfaction in the marriage. And if you read the article, you'll see that there's a lot of evidence for this. For example, in the 1980s, there was an experimental study in which they showed people an hour of porn a week for 6 weeks. And they saw that afterwards, their attitudes towards their partners had completely changed, and their attitude towards many things had changed. So the first harm we saw was sexual satisfaction. People often, because think about it, right? Like in pornography, they've got the best looking people on earth, and it's just dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. You have unlimited variety. There's just too much. And it's, I assume it's, airbrushed or whatever, but people end up raising their expectations, and then their spouses, they don't enjoy. A lot of people, especially men, end up not enjoying in-person relationships as much anymore.
So sorry to cut you off. We'll continue with the other harms, but I just remembered not a funny story, but back in high school, I had more non-Muslim friends back then, and alhamdulillah, they were all good people, obviously. So we still hang out on a consistent basis, and so sometimes one of our friends, they'd have girlfriends, right, and they would talk about their time that they lost their virginity. So one thing really shocked me. One of my friends, they come up to us and he's like, "Yo, I lost my virginity the other day, and it wasn't as good as I thought it would be. Like, I actually like porn more." And I
Oh
was
my,
like, "What?" Yeah, that was like so shocking to me. So yeah, just like you said, I guess that really messes up your perspective on things.
yeah, it's really harmful, and I think for a relationship, it's very harmful. Oftentimes, pornography use could also be an indicator that something's wrong in the relationship. So, for example, one research, and I'm just going to read right from the article. One study surveyed 20,000 ever married adults. By comparing men who had not watched explicit content in the last year, it found that men who had watched an X-rated film in the last year were 60% more likely to be divorced, 80% more likely to have had an extramarital affair, and 15% less likely to report that their marriage is very happy. So that was the one harm. And then second harm that we saw was there is a lot of correlation between pornography use and sexual dysfunction. So, for example, the U.S. military did a study in which they took a survey of their members regarding their pornography use, and they also had their medical records, so they could see the association between the two. And they saw that people who watch more porn, they were more likely to suffer from sexual dysfunction. The third thing is, there's a lot of harm that happens to the person's partner. So, for example, we spoke about a person being less sexually satisfied. That affects the self-esteem of their partner. And there's all this research and all these people whose lives have been really hurt when they find out their partner is watching pornography. Oftentimes, or many times, it ends up leading to divorce. It really is a hurtful thing. And there's one thing that I did not mention in the article. In the book Predictably Irrational, they do a study, and in that they give people a survey like, how likely are you to sexually assault someone? How likely are you to step in, if someone's being sexually assaulted, whatever. And then they asked them the same questions while the person was watching pornography. And, they were kind of heated up. At that time, they were more likely to do a lot of these crazy things that they wouldn't normally do. I think another thing is because of the algorithm of anything, like for example, when it comes to YouTube, there's an algorithm which will take you to more extreme and more extreme and more extreme. Or for example, there's a book called Zucked, in which it talks about how Facebook groups do that. The algorithm will push you to more and more extreme content.
Mm-hmm.
So same thing with pornography, is a person starts off with something and they end up becoming more and more extreme in their sexual preferences. So it's an overall harm all over. 0 out of 10, definitely would not recommend to anybody. Do not do it, all that stuff. That's pretty much the summary of the article.
So what you said pretty much breaks down the myth of, because I know a lot of secularists, they say everything is fine in moderation, alcohol, all these vices. As long as you kind of control yourself, then you can indulge in them a little bit.
I think our society really undermines how much, first of all, of an effect it has on people, especially men. I don't think many men who indulge in it regularly actually decide it. It's just something, or else, many Muslim men would not be doing it. Many Muslim men, at least Muslim men and religious men who do it, they do it not because they want to do it, but it's just because it's become an outlet for them. Many of them feel ashamed about it. So I think our society undermines how much of an effect this stuff has on us. And the second thing is, I think willpower is so overrated, and there's so much research on this. It's very unlikely for a person to start drinking alcohol. And many people are able to control themselves. But when they have those weekdays, so let's say they're going through a divorce, let's say they just got let go of work, when they're really down in the dumps, that's when you see these vices really take hold of them: gambling, alcohol, pornography. And so for society, and that's what we see, right? It's normally the people who are going through stress in society that end up falling more to drugs, end up falling more to alcohol, end up falling more to gambling, even whether they're in the higher spectrum like investment bankers, or they're on the lower spectrum like people who are homeless. The people who are really going through a tough time, they are the ones that should be our criteria to see how much willpower do we actually have, because it's possible for us to have more control today because everything is great, and then something happens and then things are horrible. But even in moderation, quote unquote moderation, I think pornography is definitely something that would have a huge harm.
Gotcha. Are there some things we can look to in the Quran and Sunnah that could be implemented in our day-to-day to kind of stay away from some of these things?
I think the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, first of all, the Quran, it talks about la taqrabu zina, don't go close to adultery. If you look at a lot of the other religions, they did not take this approach. So in some religions, in many religions, you can date, you can do whatever, just don't have sex before marriage. That's like the tagline. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He knows us, He made us, He created us, and in His infinite mercy, He banned us from even going close to it. And when it comes to pornography, many people might have an argument that, oh, this is not fornication, you're not having intercourse. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam drew a line very clearly. He said that the adultery, the fornication of the eyes is looking at evil. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us, al-haya'u shu'batun min al-iman. Haya, modesty, is a part of our iman. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us that from the wisdoms of the people before us, meaning the books before us, is that if a person does not have haya, then you can do whatever you want. So I think in the Islamic mindset, it's not just about commands. It's like, what is the feature that a Muslim should build and bring into their life? What are the qualities that we as Muslims need to cultivate into our life? And there are certain core qualities that a Muslim should have. Being honest, being sincere, having good character, and modesty. This modesty is, I think, exemplified more in Islam than any other religion these days. We are commanded in the Quran to lower our gaze from even seeing women who walk around on the streets. So what would we say about something like pornography? So and I'm not saying this to shame anyone who's watching this. I do understand that many people who might be watching this would be watching this from a place of sincerity in their heart. That many people would be watching this because they understand that this is something that they want to get out of. And I really think in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shown us His mercy for anyone who wants to quit this. Anyone who wants to quit this today, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive them. All they need to do is do 4 or 3 things. I'll count them as we go. Number 1, the person needs to stop right now. So if you're sitting at home and this is something that you're involved in, let's stop right now. Number 2, let's make a sincere promise, intention. To the best of my ability, at this moment, I have no intention of going back. Number 3, let's ask Allah for forgiveness. If you are addicted to this, go pray 2 rakat salah and ask Allah for forgiveness for indulging in this sin. And number 4, take steps, take practical steps to not return to this. By practical steps, I mean, like I said, going for addiction therapy. Like I said, going towards a accountability software like Covenant Eyes, in which you have a partner, and with that partner, you have an agreement that they will actually get your internet history once a week. Is going to be uncomfortable for a bit. But in Islam, we always look at the long term over the short term. This is something that is not natural. It's something that is hurtful. And many people on a psychology level would argue that our brains are not even, our brains are not even ready to deal with this kind of crazy dopamine boosts. So it's something that we should not be having in our lives. Let's take drastic steps to protect ourselves from this. And I think a lot of us who might not watch pornography, we also have to be careful of what we're consuming on like Instagram or TikTok or something like that. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm standing with this.
Gotcha. You mentioned that having like a lot of that, mashallah, boils down to accountability. Whether it be through these apps or partner. What would you say to someone that wants to follow the advice of don't expose your sins, and so they try to do it all themselves, but they consistently see that they're failing?
I think exposing our sins, the limitation of that is not to, like, if there's an exception to that, if a person is exposing their sin to a counselor, for example, or to a mentor, or in this example, to a accountability partner, with the intention of improving without publicizing it for the world, that would be an exception to that rule.
Right. Gotcha.
And I think the accountability partner as well needs to be, and if you are someone who is an accountability partner, you have to be very understanding. You really have to be patient, and you cannot judge the person, right?
Definitely, because like you said, this is something that I'm assuming that this is something that majority of men have a problem with, right? This is something that a lot of people, regular people, fall into on a daily basis. So there's no point in shaming them and making them feel bad, because at the end of the day, just as you said, they're trying and they are sincerely looking for outlets on how to improve and get out of this addiction.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, I apologize for interrupting.
No worries.
I think a lot of people in our generation, they were kind of taken by this new internet age, head first. And I think whether that's the harms of social media, and I'm an open addict to social media, may Allah protect me, or if it's the harms of pornography, or if it's the harms of the lack of socialness, or the lack of a Muslim community in real life. All these harms, I think we're only going to discover decades away from now. But a lot of us, we kind of just went in with this internet is this amazing thing. We just need to consume everything on it. And I think that is why I think a lot of men were children when they got exposed to this, right? And so that's why I think as a community, we need to reach out to all of us, and we need to understand that there is a life after this. This is something that we can put behind us, and we can move on, inshallah.
Definitely. I wanted to ask more so about your choice to pursue psychology as a degree. Did that influence your research going into this topic?
Yeah, so psychology is something I really, really enjoy. Even like in my leisure reading, a lot of my reading is psychology based. So to be honest, I was writing this article for my English class. I just decided to do, kill two birds with that stone. But yeah, it was nice. I think a really interesting thing I got from this is, before this, I was really scared to approach academic journals. But now it's like this cool new toy that I have. And I feel like down the road, I'll probably be using this a lot more, inshallah.
Inshallah. What was your reasoning for wanting to pursue psychology?
I just feel like in the work that I do, I'm already doing a level of, because when you are an imam or a scholar that's working with the public, you're already working with people in such a close level. But a lot of times people come to you and you feel like you're not qualified to be dealing with the issues. And a lot of times you should, and you do send them over to counseling, and you just end up being more like a first responder. But it seemed like I also wanted to kind of do more than I currently am with that. And I feel like that's important. Like we need people from our community that can be there for people, because a lot of times, you send people to counselors who are non-Muslims, and they'll be like, okay, I'm addicted to this thing. They're like, well, it's not bad. You should continue. So it's like a lot of times it's good to have people who are more culturally conscious about this stuff.
Definitely. Are you do you by chance know Mawlana Mikhail Smith?
I follow him on Instagram. I think I know him, but he doesn't. I mean, I know of him, and he doesn't know of me. It's kind of like that.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I think he's also pursuing psychology, and he actually wrote a book on I think using his psychology degree to analyze the prophetic emotional intelligence.
Yeah,
I'm reading it right now. It's amazing.
I've been meaning to read this, and I'm kind of jealous that he wrote it, because I would have loved to write a book like that. Whenever I'm reading a good book, I'm just like, I wish I wrote that book. But that sounds really cool, to be honest, and I would love to check that out, inshallah.
Definitely, you should definitely write another book on that. I would love to just have a collection of these. Inshallah. So just to wrap up with a few, quick fire questions, because I am curious, moving a bit from the topic that we just discussed. I know a lot of scholars, they say not to really pursue secular education because, all you really need is from the studies that you were taught, with our previous scholars and classical scholars, and then Quran and Sunnah, all the answers are there. So what would be your reply to that?
I think it depends on what they're arguing, right? I feel like a lot of scholars these days are very supportive of secular education, and I think a lot of the younger guys who are graduating are pursuing secular education. I don't think anyone is against secular education. I think it's more like it ends up being, practically speaking, two groups of people, right? You have people like myself who are full-time doing Islamic work. So, we make our living from this. Like I work 3 jobs, like I teach at 3 different places. But it feels like, there's another group of scholars who would have a full-time job doing something else, and then they would teach Islamic stuff on the evenings for free for the sake of Allah. And I think that's a debate that I often have with scholars. Or, not debate, it's a conversation, because that lifestyle seems very, very tempting to me. Is like, you do stuff for the sake of Allah, and then you have a job, secular job in the morning. But then you also see the scholars who are going through that lifestyle, they often struggle with giving time to the Islamic work, just because after you work 8 hours at a job, you have a very little time afterwards. So that's, I think, where everyone's kind of teetering on. It's like, are you going to do this full time and make your living out of it, or are you going to do something else full time and do this on the side? And I think there's good arguments for both sides. I'm currently on this side, but that second side seems just so tempting, But yeah, that's kind of, I think, what the argument generally goes.
Gotcha. And my second question would be, more personal, because I'm doing like not a lot, but it's like different sectors. So like I'm in college, but then I also do part-time work, and I'm trying to do this. And it can seem like kind of overwhelming, but Marshall, you're doing a ton more, and you're writing books, you're teaching, you're doing a lot of that. Yeah. So how do you balance all of that?
Okay, so there's 2 books I'm going to leave you with, right? There's a book called Getting Things Done by David Allen.
Getting Things Done. Okay.
I think that book really does help you. It's called The Stress-Free Art of Productivity or something like that, right? It's all about, like, you wake up early in the morning and or once a day, you organize your day. So you empty out all your inboxes, you go through, like, there's a whole method that he goes through, right? And he actually does this where he goes to CEOs and organizes their life for them. And the second book, and I feel like this book should be, you said, how old are you? You're 20 years old?
Yeah, I'm 20. I'm in my third year of college right now.
I mean, I don't know if it's a good book to read in your early 20s, just because your early 20s are all about the hustle. But maybe it is. I don't know. It's called Essentialism, the
I've heard of
Disciplined
this.
Pursuit of Less. And it's a really good book. I mean, my lifestyle is the exact opposite of what he's arguing for. I think everyone thinks the grass is greener on the other side. So someone who's just focusing on one thing will look at my life and be like, oh, look, he can do 3 jobs and study at university and write books at the same time. And I look at that guy's life and I'm like, wow, he can just focus on one thing. Like someone who I really love and admire, Dr. Shoaib, who's about to release a book on Islam and evolution. I was just telling him the other day, I'm like, you just focused on writing one book for 2 years, and he read like literally hundreds of books just to write that one book. Like he could just put us all into one project, and like, how is that like? That's what I want to know, right? So I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I'm sure everyone who's on whatever side of the spectrum can see the pros and cons of it. I think when you're younger, you can do a lot more multitasking, but down the road, and for me, down the road means 40. After 40, I want to be focusing on one thing.
Gotcha. Well, Jazakallah khair for your time. I know you have an exam right after this, so may Allah.
I have to take an exam, meaning I have to fail other people, not.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Mashallah. So I'll make up for the people that are taking the exam.
All right, man.
All right, man.
Take care of yourself. Assalamu alaikum.
Of course. All right. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Oh, and before, just because I made a promise with one of my previous guests, he made me do this dua at the end of every single one of my episodes. So, subhanakallahumma bihamdika wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. And as you definitely know, this dua, inshallah, if you read it at the end of every meeting, then there's going to be barakah in what you said. And inshallah, Allah will forgive us for anything wrong that we said.
Ameen. MashaAllah. May Allah bless you, man. You seem very, very sincere.
Inshallah. Well, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ba 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 ba